This is Aino Corey, who is the PT chair for the GOTO conferences, interviewing Liz Keogh without a title and Dan North without a title.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So first I'd like to hear from you. Now the reason why we invited you together was because of the little three-letter thing, the BDD thing.
Mm-hmm.
And can you explain very shortly what BDD is? And when I say shortly, I mean it should probably be Liz doing it instead.
not a second generation.
Anything you want done briefly, Liz.
Okay, it's using examples to talk through how an application behaves from the user's perspective, and having conversations around those examples.
Okay.
I should probably mention the automation thing, but I hate the automation thing these days. So.
You hate the automation thing?
Yes, I'm so sorry we wrote JBehave. I really am. JBehave 1 was fine because nobody ever used it.
Yes, it was
great for teaching.
And it was a thought experiment. The whole point of JBehave was I wonder what JUnit would look like if you wrote it in a BDD style. And the answer was JBehave, and I was quite pleased with that. It came out kind of how I expected it to come out.
Yeah.
And then people started. Then Liz made it usable, and people started using it, which was a disaster.
So it ruins the purpose, you think?
I think as a way of getting people to have conversations and carrying those conversations into the code, it was fantastic. You know, absolutely fantastic. The problem I'm seeing these days is people are not having the conversations, and most of the time. Every time I see people having problems with BDD, having problems with Cucumber, having problems with JBehave, I look at the scenarios, and it's really blindingly obvious from the language of the scenarios. They are frequently too detailed, frequently talking about the actual UI components. I know nobody's had a conversation, you know?
So what's happening with, and this is anything with tooling, is that the focus shifts onto the tooling. And there's a lovely quote from, I can't remember the guy's name, from Harvard Business School, that people don't want a quarter-inch drill, they want a quarter-inch hole. Yeah. And so now let's assume that we want a quarter-inch hole, and we've just come up with a drill, and now suddenly all of the conversation is in drilling technique.
Yeah. Which
make of drill should you use? Oh, you should use a hand drill.
Yes.
Real drillers use a hand drill. Oh no, I've got a power tool. Oh, you've got a lithium-ion battery. Like, remember the hole we wanted over there?
Yeah.
That's, no one cares about that anymore. And it's the same thing. It's like BDD is using descriptions of behaviour of a system from the point of view of all kinds of different stakeholders. And these days, I'm thinking a bit more from a risk perspective. So what you're trying to do is surface risk from all different stakeholders. So you've got, what are the security scenarios? What's the security risk? What's the compliance regulatory risk? What about the business correctness? Does it actually solve the problem we thought? What about the operational characteristics like availability? Let's have conversations about those and let those surface risk, and that drive the way we do development. Oh no, are you using RSpec or RBehave or what was it, JBehave and implement? There's hundreds of these things, and it almost becomes like a rite of passage that you need to write a BDD framework. And I'm very sorry about that.
I'm seeing lots and lots of people using the English language frameworks like Cucumber and JBehave, and the business aren't even reading them. So you've got an extra level of abstraction in there, an extra level of maintenance that you've got to do. You've got to get it all rigged up with your builds and everything else. Just use a DSL. Write yourself a nice little tiny DSL and use that.
In fact, yeah, I say most of the BDD I've ever done, we were just saying before we started recording, BDD is actually 10 years old. So the first time I was talking about, I was talking with programmers about basically how to do TDD, but without using the word test, was in 2003. And the first lines of JBehave were written at the end of 2003.
Okay.
And it's like 2013.
And now that it's 10 years old, is it showing signs of fatigue? Do you see anti-patterns coming up? Has it imploded? What's happening with it right now?
It's exploded rather than imploded.
It's exploded.
Yeah, so we've added things like feature injection, so taking it all the way up to the initial project vision. I'm doing a lot of work with Cynefin, the Cynefin framework, which models complexity, particularly, and looking at where BDD is appropriate and where it isn't, and how you can actually tell from the language people use in conversations. So I don't think it's showing signs of fatigue. I think, as Dan said, we have a tool, therefore people focus on the tool. And I think that's a real shame, because a lot of the power of it is actually just in those conversations. It's an analysis tool.
Do you think it's because it's easier for people to discuss the tool than to discuss the real problems that they do that? Or?
I think it's useful. It's the joke about the drunk guy, you know, looking around under a lamppost for his keys, and the guy says, "Why are you looking under the lamppost?"
Yeah.
So I've lost my keys. Where? I dropped them over there in the dark. Well, why are you looking under the lamppost? Well, because it's light over here.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know how to have the conversations about the conversations, so I have the conversations about the tooling.
Exactly.
But to answer your question, how have I seen it change in 10 years? I think I've been really delighted. I've been really delighted by the way it has evolved, and I've been particularly delighted by the fact that it hasn't been me. You know, so you've got folks like Liz doing a BDD for life. Do you know what I mean? Applying the same thinking to how you structure goals and you know, in your own sort of self-coaching type thing. You've seen folks like GOTO Chicago with specification by example, which I still maintain is the BDD book. You know, he wrote a way better book about BDD than I could have, and it's brilliant. You know, and he's doing that stuff, and that's now given rise to impact mapping. And impact mapping is, again, it's a natural evolution. It's like, well, okay, given that we took BDD as basically as a reframing of TDD, but proper Kent-Beck TDD, so like at all different levels of abstraction, not just down in the code, where most people think TDD happens. TDD is a full stack thing as well. So taking that, what if you took that right out into the business as the product vision, as the goals, as the, you know, what would your data look like? Well, hang on, that itself becomes its own discipline, which is a really exciting place. And so now, you know, it's spawned that. And then Chris Matson and Alf Marston with the real option stuff, which is just fantastic. And all of these things, you know, certainly BDD didn't cause those things, but it's that same space. Do you know what I mean?
It
was part of the ecosystem, and it's certainly one of the factors that influence those things. And that's I'm so excited about that. And what I love is I don't know where it's going to go next. You know?
And what do you see as changes?
It's really interesting. I went back and looked at some early blogs, and we were still talking about how should allowed uncertainty to exist way back in 2004. The word should allowed people to question it, allowed some uncertainty to exist when you're having these conversations. So I don't think that's changed. I think we've got better language around it. I think we've got more ways of having those conversations, so with the Cynefin framework and things like that. One of the big changes that I've seen that I'm having so much fun with right now is with the feature injection the way I do it, which is a little bit different to how Chris does it, but it's how Chris taught me. And identifying different stakeholders, you know, and actually the recognition that some user stories aren't actually about users. And so you can start looking, we normally say given a context, when an event happens then an outcome occurs. And I've got this thing that I call context questioning. Is there any other context which leads to a different outcome? You can do that with stakeholders. If we go live with this thing, is there any stakeholder who's going to stop us going live? Is there any stakeholder who's going to get upset with us, you know? And identifying different stakeholders with it. And surfacing things like, if you've got any new requirements, you've got new stakeholders you've never made happy before, or stakeholders got a new goal, you're providing this capability to people that they've never had. And as soon as you start seeing these new things come up, you know there's going to be uncertainty in them, and you can actually hear it when people talk through the examples. You can hear the uncertainty in the language they use. And that's great because, like, as Dan was saying, that surfaces the risk.
Yes.
You know? That's
asking
where
the right questions makes it surface.
Yeah.
So you're talking as if, I know you have the patterns in BDD. Do you have the anti-patterns too?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess.
Tools.
Yeah. I guess it's about with any of these. Well, when you say the anti-pattern is not recognising patterns. What I mean by that is patterns are about context. The whole point of patterns, the whole point of pattern language, the whole point of Christopher Alexander's original work is that there isn't a pattern for this thing. It's you identify a combination, an ecosystem of patterns that naturally resolve and balance out all the forces. He's a complete hippie, right? So in the same way, there are a bunch of patterns that resolve in a given context. Now, if you don't have context, if you don't have a contextual awareness, you'll just look for rules, because that's how we learn. It's a Dreyfus novice level.
Yes.
I need rules and recipes. I need quick wins. I need that stuff. So if you give me what you think are patterns, I'm going to see rules there, because I need them to be rules. Andy Hunt, the pragmatic programmer, Andy Hunt, has a great story about he used to teach a design patterns course, and one of his students in one of the breaks was like furiously coding away or whatever, and he said, "What are you doing there?" He said, "I'm up to 17." 17 what?
Yeah.
I've got 17 patterns in this code. I only need 4 more. Right? I've got the whole book.
Yeah.
And it's like, stop coding. You know, and this is the thing, is that and exactly the same thing with XP. You know, Kent Beck's original conception of XP is the values, nothing else. If you talk to him about it, it's funny, he says exactly the same thing about XP as I say about BDD. I want to get business people and technical people talking. I want to get them on the same page. XP is I want to get business people and technical people on the same page. Okay? It's not, so the book is, here are some things I value: communication, simplicity, feedback, you know, courage. And by the way, here's an experience report. Here's some things that we did on this whole bunch of projects, and some of them work for us. Like pair programming was cool, TDD was cool, continuous integration was cool. Here's a bunch of, that's not XP. XP is those values. XP is getting those guys together. Here's some things that might be useful. No, they became the 12 commandments, right?
Yeah.
And
BDD's always had the tagline, software that matters, writing software that matters.
Yeah.
You know, that's BDD. If you're writing software that doesn't matter because you didn't have a conversation with the business first, you're not doing BDD.
No.
Yeah.
You're not doing anything really.
You're not doing anything valuable, but you don't know that. And that's the thing, is you're second order ignorant. You don't know that this thing's useless.
Okay.
Because you're not getting the feedback. And again, you see the lean startup guys are talking about validated learning. You know, you're not putting this in front of people. And a great way to put hypothetical code in front of people is to talk about what it might do. And then you're right back to the behavior again.
But let's get back to the term anti-patterns.
Mm-hmm.
When I asked you, so Liz, you said there were tons of anti-patterns. Do you have a name for an anti-pattern that people use to misuse?
I've got one called Too Many Scenarios.
Yeah.
People seem to start with a really basic skeleton, you know, a skeleton scenario, and then they'll add an edge case, and then they'll add another edge case, and another edge case, and another edge case. And the first scenarios, the boring ones, are now included in the really interesting ones, but nobody ever seems to want to delete them for some reason. So you end up with these files with 25 scenarios in, and all the really interesting scenarios are right down the bottom of the file. They add them to the bottom instead of the top. So
it's not just too many scenarios; it's also prioritization or visibility.
Yeah, it's you've got to make these things interesting, otherwise nobody ever looks at them, nobody ever reads them.
Yeah.
I say put the interesting ones at the top, and when you're reading them, if you get down page, you'll probably find at some point all of the scenarios. So for instance, if I say, given Fred bought a microwave for £100, when Fred brings the microwave back for a refund, then he should get £100, right? That's a boring scenario. If we do the one where the microwave got discounted, and he only gets £90 back, that'll include all of the behaviour that's in the £100 one. So they'll start with the basic one, and then they'll add one with a discount, and then they'll add one where the item gets put back into stock. But nobody ever deletes that first scenario, and it's now boring. You learn nothing from reading that scenario.
It's easy to lose sight of the fact this is documentation. The whole point is executable specification. It's documentation.
Yeah.
And in the same way, and because people think, oh no, this is tests. More tests must be better because tests are good, right? More documentation isn't better. The right documentation is better. The right level of documentation and the right focus is better.
Yes.
So if I can give you the smallest subset of examples of this part of a system that tells you exactly how it works and why it's different from other ways we could have done it, and the kinds of things we were probably thinking about when we wrote it, that should be plenty. Yeah. So that was actually that kind of anti-pattern I see is the more is better anti-pattern, where it really isn't. The other one I see, and it's funny because I blogged this years ago, and people keep going back to this thing because it keeps on being still really relevant, which is mixing domains. So in a scenario, typically you have a whole bunch of different domains. You've got the solution domain. What's the problem I'm trying to solve? It's a healthcare system, and the domain is diagnosis, right? Patient diagnosis. Okay. Well, so now the scenario we'll talk about, when I put these values in these fields on this form. Whoa, hang on, we've just gone into the domain of data capture, right? Because values and fields and form. Okay. And then you end up with like 2 or 3 different domains all mixed together. So the implementation, the user interface, and the solution domain, all interspersed in this scenario, makes this thing incredibly brittle. If any part of that changes, something here is going to have to change.
Yes.
And so then you get the inertia thing. Oh, I can't move fast because of my tests. I can't move fast because of my documentation. Is just crazy. Surely that means you've got the wrong documentation.
And then it's obstacles instead of
yeah.
Right, I got one last question, which is not related to BDD. And that is, haiku poems and software is... What's the point?
So, the thing about devs is when you give devs half a problem, they'll come up with an entire solution with no trouble at all. So we like to fill in gaps in our heads. And haiku does the same thing. So one of my favourite haiku, a guy called Michael came up with in one of the workshops, which was hot air rushing past my face, mind the gap. And for anyone who's been to London, you feel yourself standing on the edge of the platform with the tube train coming in. You can actually feel yourself there. Your mind has made that image out of the discrepancy between the lines of that poem. So it's what we call haiku moment, that gap in those lines. And it's your intuition kicking in, basically.
It's like yours, was it refactoring, code falls into place, green bar?
Green bar, absolutely. Yeah. Next year will be the 10th anniversary of my blog post where I got my first ever green bar.
Oh!
So I'm going to do a little retrospective on how my career's gone since my first ever green bar.